Hello and welcome to the Foodeshow. Today's session is Understanding the U.S. Food Market, and with me we have three wonderful speakers from the U.S. Hello everyone. Hello Leila.
Hello.
Hello.
In New York.
And we have New York, and we have Bob Bauer in New Jersey, right, Bob?
That's correct. Yes.
And Leticia in Miami. So, hi, Leticia.
Thank you for having us, Huda. Very nice to be here today.
Wonderful to have you on. So, Leila Raji is the Chief Compliance Officer for IQCC, which is our partner on the Foodeshow, and Bob Bauer is the president of the American Food Industries. He's also our partner on the Foodeshow, and Leticia Baca is the president of Lakewood Organics. Before we start with the topic, I would like to ask each one of you, and I'll start with Leila, and then move on to Bob and Leticia, and want you to tell us more about yourself and what are you doing to help people understand the U.S. food market.
Thank you, Huda. First of all, I wanted to thank you to have me at the second edition of the Foodeshow. I was here for the first one, and it is with great pleasure that I'm back to discuss with you and share what I do. So I'm a food safety, regulatory, and compliance consultant, and my goal is to help companies comply with the U.S. regulation, and mostly before they actually get to bring their food to the U.S., so that they're able to do to go through all the different requirements without any problems for when their food comes to the market and through the FDA.
And Bob?
Hello, everybody. I'm fortunate enough to be here for the second show, too. I enjoyed the first one. Happy to be back. And the Association of Food Industries is the trade association for the U.S. food import industry. So we've been around since 1906, me not quite that long, but we are focused on the imported industry, making sure folks know what the regulations are and how to comply. And we have 1,000+ member companies around the world, and you know, we're here to help them do that. And I get to have a little bit more fun today and not talk so much about compliance, but on some trends and things that we've seen, particularly since the pandemic started. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Bob. We're looking forward to your insights as well. And Leticia?
Hi all, I'm Leticia Baca. I am the president of Lakewood Organic. We're an organic manufacturer company located in Miami, Florida. We are currently exporting to 16 different countries, and we have placement nationwide here in the United States. And I'll echo some of what Leila and what Bob said. I'm just excited today to share some of the insight and some of the trends that we're seeing in our industry, and how we've used compliance as a competitive advantage to ensure predictable events don't disrupt our business.
Wonderful. So, Leila, I know that you prepared some slides for us. I will be happy to share them. And I will let you cover the first is the compliance.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I thought it would be a good idea, since we have about 10 minutes to discuss the different slides, to go straight forward to the different requirements for manufacturers and importers, because as much as manufacturers understand what they have to do, they don't. I have found that within the different fields I have worked in, many of them don't really understand what their importers' requirements are and why they're being asked certain documents or certain systems they have to put in place. And they also need to understand that this is all part of the same regulation, whether it's manufacturers or importers. So go ahead with the second slide. So pretty much what I have here is the requirements, the basic requirement that many today are familiar with in terms of any type of food facility, whether it's a U.S.-based or an foreign-based manufacturer, needs to be registered with the FDA, and for the foreign facility, they need to have a U.S. agent that represent them, so that the FDA can easily contact them in case they need to. The biannual registration, which is the re-registering of the information or updating, is biennial every 2 years. Many companies tend to misunderstand the difference between the biannual registration and the U.S. agent representation, but it's two different things. Very important, the HARPC, the Hazard Analysis and Risk-Based Preventive Control. Again, this is something in a world of HACCP that has brought a little bit of confusion, especially outside of the United States, where this HACCP regulation has become the basis of any food safety system, which is not what is going on in the United States. And this is why the ARPC regulation was developed. So that's something different, which really foreign food suppliers need to understand. Another new thing, which is for this year, a unique identification number for each registered facility. And that is very important, so that FDA is actually able to verify that this company really exists, and that we don't have phantoms companies that are registered under many different names, many different information. Something that I think people might not always realize within the preventive control, hazard analysis, and food safety plans is that many of them never had a recall procedure, and that is very important. It is not enough to just be registered and have an agent or a hazard analysis. If you don't have a recall procedure today, you still don't meet the regulation. I'm waiting for it. Okay. And prior notice seems to have been well understood. And I still find that not everywhere UPS, FedEx, or other carrier follow the regulation in terms of requiring prior notices from the company that send samples or send food products, other than actually sending a full container, where the prior notice wouldn't be the responsibility of the manufacturer. So the manufacturer is the one responsible for some prior notices when they're sending food and samples. And I mentioned earlier this separation between HACCP and HARPC. The regulation in the United States in terms of HACCP being for seafood and juice under FDA. So the manufacturers that are already regulated by HACCP regulation are exempt from some of the requirements of FSMA, and the low acid canned food facilities also, because they are themselves regulated by other regulation. And that's something that, again, foreign companies, especially in Europe, who have developed all food safety plans based on HACCP, or at least the HACCP theory, not the regulation, but a HACCP theory, have a very hard time adapting to, because they already have a set mind in terms of critical control point rather than the preventive controls. So a lot of foreign manufacturers also don't always understand that that all the work is not just on them, but that importers also are part of this regulation and have to put in place what we refer to as the FSVP, which is the foreign verification foreign supplier verification programs, and I'll go back to it in a little bit. So one thing that is very important for the manufacturers to understand, especially when they move from HACCP to HARPC, and again, I have to each time say that, you know, there is no move from HACCP to HARPC, but when you are a foreign company and you have developed a food safety plan based on the HACCP theory, not a regulation, today, you still don't meet the US regulation because the US never asked you to actually do a HACCP plan in the first place. If you are certified against one of the GFSI standards, such as BRC or IFS, most probably, in order to get this certification, which is really a standard, you have developed a HACCP plan. But today, we're telling you that even though you have developed this HACCP plan, we need you to step back and develop an HARPC plan, because that's what the US regulation is asking you, but it is not what your standard for certification in terms of BRC or IFS is asking you. And indeed, there is a need and there is already an effort for the two of them to work together to see how this is going to be in terms of having one food safety system. So the most important things in terms of the HARPC is, of course, the preventive control qualified individual. This is new. Many people overseas have a hard time also during these trainings because it seems to start as a HACCP training that switches into something very different, which goes into the preventive controls, doesn't go into the CCPs, but then when you work on it, you're thinking, well, one of this CCP is actually this process preventive control, this CCP is actually a process preventive control. And really it is the goal is to help manufacturers rewire their brain from HACCP to HARPC. So yes, new controls, the process preventive controls, allergen preventive control, sanitation preventive control, supply chain preventive control. And the whole thing gets to be in a food safety plan, and importers will turn to these companies who already have either a certification or have a HACCP plan and say, please give me your food safety plan document. And they will send what they have and they will be told, this is not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a food safety plan based on HARPC. And you're giving me a HACCP plan based on HACCP, and this is not what the regulations say. And it creates actually a lot of anxiety on the side of the manufacturers, because pretty much they can pull out of the HACCP plan what they need to build their food safety plan under FISMA, but many of them have a hard time in terms of making the difference based on the product they make. So the food safety plan document really will include a lot of things taken out of a HACCP plan. It will actually require less documentation, but it will also have the recall plan as part of the recall procedure as part of the food safety plan. This does not exempt, of course, any food manufacturer from good manufacturing practices, which have been in place forever and needs to remain there. And there is also this requirement of food defense plan. Many companies jump to the HARPC analysis, forgetting about the good manufacturing practices and the food defense plan, which of course are basis for any of the food safety program. So US importers use words that tend to trigger anxiety I've seen among manufacturers overseas, such as, are you FSVP compliant? And most companies don't understand what does it mean to be FSVP compliant. In fact, what they're saying is, do you have all that I need so I would be able to have a foreign supplier verification program that is going to meet the requirements of the FDA? So this is where few exchanges start, and very much confusion appears in what I have seen, where the importer believes that the manufacturer is responsible for FISMA, quote unquote. That's how they call it. And the manufacturer doesn't understand what he needs to give to the foreign supplier, to the importer. So it is important that food importers, and there are many classes and many documents available for US food importers to understand what they need to put in place. But I think it would be very important to help manufacturers understand what it is that is required, not only from them, but from the importers, so that they can actually understand that an importer is not there to make their life miserable, but that there is already today, there is a requirement for the importer also to have the right documents. Yes. So an importer cannot just purchase a product. An importer has to either conduct a risk-based analysis of his manufacturer's, suppliers' activities, or it needs to do verification on site, lot by lot certification. We already saw that in HACCP. It can ask for documents such as the food safety plan with the HARPC controls, and continue over the year, or based on the risk analysis and the danger associated with the product, check on what the manufacturer is doing to control these dangers. So so the importer has as much of an important role as the manufacturer in complying with the Food Safety Modernization Act, to make sure that the product that comes to the US and that is distributed to a consumer is a safe product. So, as I said, there are many different things that an importer can do. The importer, on the previous slide, if during a food show, if there is no importer, the agent can be actually the person responsible for the goods, or any other responsible entity. So again, in this case, like for the manufacturer, if the supplier import products that are subject to the HACCP regulation or the low acid canned food regulation, then they are themselves exempt in terms of obtaining the HARPC food safety plan. But of course, that would mean that they are already obtaining from their manufacturer the HACCP plan or the low acid canned food regulation documentation. So today, it isn't just the manufacturer that needs to comply, but the importer also, because a manufacturer alone does not mean that you will be able to bring in, that the product will be able to get into the US without a foreign supplier verification plan. The importer can hire a third party to assist them if they feel they're not able to do actually this verification process. And this is it.
Wonderful, Leila.
I hope this.
Thank you so much for all this.
I try to speak as fast as possible, and I hope this allowed manufacturers and suppliers to really see a little bit why both of them need to do their job for the product to make it to the US safely and also meet the regulation.
Wonderful. I know that Bob is dealing with regulation all the time, and he's training on regulations.
Yes.
Do you have something, Bob, to add? And especially if you can share with us also some stories of what happens if people are not compliant. That is very important.
Okay, sounds good. First, I'll compliment Leila for being able to give a pretty concise summary of the regulations. They're in books that are this big, so it's for taking 10, 15 minutes is tough. So I'll kind of compliment in addition to complimenting her. So that's and add to it a little bit. And just that she mentioned training courses. So the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance, if you Google that, it'll take you to the best place to get food safety training, because these courses were written, it's funded by FDA. And I, for example, served on a task force for the import course, the FSVP course, and I give courses all the time. So I know how good they are. And I know the one for the human food rule, which the suppliers would be taking. It's 20 hours a week of coursework. So it's not easy, that human food course, but you can take it online. It's in all kinds of languages. So it is there. And I strongly recommend 2 people from a company, whether you're an importer or a supplier, take the course. And you may want to take your supplier's course or vice versa to get a feel for what they have to do. Because if there are hiccups, and I don't have the documentation that I need here in the United States, and I don't follow through, FDA could say to me, okay, warning letter for you. If you receive something from FDA saying we want to come and inspect you, and you don't reply within 10 days, FDA can cancel your registration. Right. So it's just something you have to be aware of what the requirements are, what the consequences are. Most companies are doing okay. From the start, we knew that the record keeping would be the biggest issue. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. And it's got to contain the records that are needed. They don't have to look a certain way, but the needed records have to be there someplace. And that is what we're finding, the areas that people are coming up short in. So for the most part, things are moving along pretty well. And I'll wrap up at the end with a couple quick thoughts on all that as well. But I did want to get into some trends and some of what's happened over the last year. A year ago today was the date that a lot of people here in the U.S. say the pandemic officially started. So what's happened in that year? Things such as line extensions, way down. And I imagine that most of the people on this session are smaller companies. According to IRI data that I saw, small brands, and the way they define it is store sales of less than $100 million. Some of those are pretty large, but they still fall into a small category. They grew by 18.3% in their retail sales last year. In the same period, private label share, that was up 12, so that's also a nice jump. But the real large companies, more than 100 million, their jump, although impressive at 7.5, is nearly a third of what the smaller companies are. So it's creating opportunities. Another area that's opportunities is that I'm stuck at home for a year. My wife's doing a great job of, and amongst everything else she's doing, cooking meals that are diversified a little bit. So we're trying some ethnic ingredients and things along those lines. Well, as soon as we can get out to a restaurant, she's going to want to see how she did. So the ethnic restaurants, if you're supplying to them, they're going to do well. Now, first, people in the U.S., we may want to go get our hamburger and steak that we haven't had out in a long time. But we are going to want to go to the ethnic restaurants because maybe we haven't been able to reproduce that at home. We want to go back to that. So it's an area for the folks on this call that we do expect to see some growth. And if you are in the retail end of things, the good news there is that although the growth is slowing down, when polled, consumers say that post-pandemic, they're still going to cook more at home than they did pre-pandemic. So whether they do that or not, we don't know. Other areas that are experiencing growth and should continue, plant-based foods, way up, and then also health and wellness, anything functional foods, anything that's touting health and wellness. Obviously, it's got to be a legitimate reason to promote it, but we're all saying when asked that we're going to focus, and we are focusing more on health and wellness. So those categories are seeing some growth, and it looks like they will continue. And then another area, e-commerce. So whether it's on Amazon or some other vehicle, e-commerce has really grown at an enormous rate and looks like it will continue. And so if you're able to get in that realm, that's definitely an area to go look at. Now, in terms of what a supermarket looks like here in the United States, we have the center store, which for years was going down because it's the everyday stuff. So it's tough to glamorize it and tough to make people want to go to the center store, because on the perimeter of the store is where all the high value, the high margin items are, and the stuff that looks nice and stuff. If I'm going to somebody's house, I'm going to go pick up a plate of vegetables that has everything in it, and cheese and crackers and all that kind of stuff. Well, with the pandemic, I may not be going out, so I'm going to get those ingredients at home. So I'm buying the crackers and the things that are in the center store, and I'm buying the baking needs and everything else. So center store has seen a tremendous amount of growth. So if consumers do as they say they're going to do and eat at home and cook at home more frequently, those categories will continue to see some growth. I saw something just over the weekend, actually, and it was listing the top growth categories. The top 5 were cleaning type of things, hand soap and all that. The next 10, I believe it was, 8 of them were food items, and they were all center store items, baking goods, powdered milk, frozen seafood was one, and breakfast drinks and stuff for smoothies, things along those lines. Again, that people may have been getting out before, now they're making for themselves at home. So we think those areas will continue to go. So I'll move to some more general type of things now. Again, people, I think if they haven't already tried something new or are still looking to do that, which creates opportunities for the folks in this session. You also have the ability to tell us your story, and the internet allows you to do that. A brand can invest some time and money on a website that tells me about the family history or the growing region in particular, and what makes your product unique, and why should I want to try it. It's worked for companies that have done it well over the years, and it will continue to work. And it's an advantage that a foreign product has over a US made product, because we think we know the stories about everybody and here, and how unique are they going to be. Where it's from a different culture, it is a lot more unique. So we think that'll happen. Supply chain issues, unfortunately, I have to bring up. They're there, and they're not going away anytime soon, unfortunately. Supply chain / logistics. So it may be on your end. You may have everything ready to go. You can't get it either to your port, or it's sitting at the port waiting to go here. It may be on my end. I'm importing from you, and it's on one of the 25 ships that's now sitting outside the port of LA. And I'm incurring costs and everything. One of the keys is communication. The second you have a problem or come aware of a problem, you have to communicate that to me. I need to be doing that with my customers and my logistics providers and all that. It may not speed up the problem, but the better we communicate during times of difficulty, the better business partners we're going to be going forward. And it kind of gets me to the second to last point I wanted to make, is it's built on what Layla was talking about before in terms of all these new regulations the communications you're going to have with everybody you deal with need to change if they haven't already. I might have been buying for you for 3 generations. Now, all of a sudden, I'm needing all kinds of documents that I never needed from you before if I'm going to comply correctly. You can't be insulted by it. You want to be educated by it. So that's why I recommend that FSPCA course, so that you are fully aware of what is required. Don't, like she said, don't assume because you know HACCP that you know FSMA, because you don't know it all, and you won't be qualified to be the preventive control qualified individual if you only know HACCP, no matter how well you know it. So communication is changing, and it's a point I really drive home when I do my training. And then I just wanted to kind of close with the fact that even with the pandemic, even with everything else that's going on that's impacting us, food safety never took a break. And it can never take a break because inspections are still taking place. I can, if I'm an importer here, FDA may knock on my door in 15 minutes and say, I'm here about an entry you made 2 months ago. Let me see the food safety documents. Now, thankfully, the industry as a whole has done very well in this past year. And there really haven't been many food safety incidents. And we want to keep it that way because it's demonstrating to our partners and our consumers that we're here to provide you safe food that tastes good. And we're not ever stopping on food safety and food quality. And that's a great message that the industry has done a great job on over the last year, and certainly hope it continues. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Rita.
Thank you, Bob. To you, basically for the food service business, a lot of the food service has been impacted, and a lot of suppliers abroad are mainly going for the food service. Do you think it would pick up in 2021, or the trend is still retail?
It will pick up as restaurants begin to open. Where I am in New Jersey, the restaurants that are open can be, I think it's 35% right now capacity. Okay. Yet you have a lot of consumers not willing to go. My wife really is not comfortable going out to a restaurant. As we start getting vaccinated, it will slowly pick up, but it won't be this huge jump. It's going to be, percentage points each month as more and more states open up and more people get vaccinated.
Thank you so much, Bob. Now to Leticia. And Leticia, my question to you as a person that has had a career in logistics and channel and products, what is the strategy for any importer or exporter to the US into using the channels and how to deal with them?
I'll echo a lot of what Bob just mentioned in terms of communication. I think that's the biggest key in terms of supply chain visibility and resiliency, especially in a time like the pandemic, something that was in large part unprecedented in that scale in which this pandemic reached. Personally, speaking from a person who's not only procuring, but also selling a finished good, product into the market, I will say that communication is by far the biggest competitive advantage that you can have. You can never be too prepared. And I feel like all too often, you may assume a supplier can, respond to demands, but as Bob mentioned, you can have port closures. There've been serious delays into a lot of into whether it be transportation, the trucks or ocean containers. There's been delay on both sides. And I think a lot what the pandemic showed us, and especially how we can use compliance to our competitive advantage, is that when my primary supplier or even secondary suppliers weren't able to fulfill orders, it was our relationship with our compliance agencies. And I'm not only speaking about the FDA, but in this case, our product is organic, speaking with our organic certifying agency and using them as a partner so that you can add suppliers to your network so that you can respond to the demand, so that you are nimble. It's a very interesting fact that Bob mentioned that most of the smaller companies were able to be more resilient. And I think a lot of that has to do with our adaptability, that there's not a lot of red tape to make decisions, there's not a lot of red tape to innovate a new product. I will agree that we didn't have the opportunity to present new products into the retail market this year, but that's only because we were overwhelmed, not only us as the manufacturer, but even the retailers responding to the demand and people coming into the supermarkets, considering, many restaurants closed down for most of this pandemic and even today are not fully operational. I agree that, we will see some gradual changes coming into the market, but some trends, I think some lifts are here to stay. I honestly feel that a company that offers wellness, but has a brand of integrity are going to do very well post this pandemic. I can share with you that products that are high in vitamin C, high in antioxidants, and vegetable-based products have all gone up an average of 300% this year. I mean, we have been overwhelmed with keeping up with the demand. So I can see the value in partnering up with our compliance agencies so that we can be more nimble in this ever-changing marketplace, especially when you're sourcing from high-risk countries where you are taking a risk. And if there's the first time that you are purchasing from these new sources, and depending on the scale in which you want to integrate them into your supply chain, it's going to be pivotal to have a close relationship where you're exchanging expectations, documentations, and meeting the criteria that you need in order to keep your business going.
Oh, thank you for that. Leila or Bob, do you would like to add anything to what Leticia said? And
I'd like to talk.
yeah, go ahead, Leila.
Yes, I would like to talk about the communication. You both mentioned communication and how it is important. And I would like to share with you some examples where I find indeed that communication is very important, but the world of technology is sometimes going so fast that it might be going too fast. Nowadays, a lot of big companies or smaller companies, in terms of either streamlining or not having enough personnel, use portals for food safety documentation, filling out all the information. So suppliers overseas get with their email address a link and a password, and then they have to log in and put in their hazard analysis, and they have to put in their mitigation strategies, and they have to put in their food defense plan, and some of them don't even speak English and have a very hard time first understanding what is expected from them. And then as they struggle through these portals, they will get an information or a message that says, your plan has been rejected. And find themselves in a situation where I get phone call and I say, people ask me, could you work with me through that portal, because it's huge, it's big, I don't know what to do, and my supplier is telling me that I have until my importer is telling me I have until Saturday to actually fill out everything. So indeed, communication, I think, in these transitions, in this new food safety portal, I would say nearly automatization, there needs to be still communication. A lot of companies with the Food Safety Modernization Act who had mainly salespeople, have found themselves, of course, needing to have food safety quality managers that can be people who manage documents but might have never been on the floor of a factory, and who sometimes have never even gone through the late 1990s HACCP training and all the life of HACCP we've had to deal with. So they say things like, oh, HACCP is obsolete. We don't do HACCP anymore. HACCP is not. So there is also a need for these younger people who are all over the place managing these new portals to make sure that they themselves understand. I've seen many companies that have been sending to the United States for the longest time low acid canned food, such as canned olives, canned fish, canned everything, who have been told no more HACCP for you. You're now HARPC, where it does not, they're part of the exemption. So it is very important also that the exemption linked to the regulation is understood by people. So they come to me and I say, well, it doesn't even apply to you. So then we have to go pull out the book, because we have to pull out the regulation, we have to pull the right chapter, we have to pull out the right part. And actually the supplier, the importer pushes back all the responsibility on the manufacturer. Well, no, you are. So if you're not, you prove it. So I think it is very important that there is still a communication, and it is sometimes difficult even for the manufacturers to know or understand where they fall themselves within the regulation so that they can either explain to the importer or defend themselves, quote unquote. I'm sure Bob has seen that happen.
Well, I certainly have, and I'm glad you brought that up, because if someone, for example, took that FSPCA course as a manufacturer in a limited time, we couldn't get into it all, but yeah, so the low acid canned food has an exemption. It's a partial exemption, but what it is, as the importer, I still need all of the documents to show that the food was produced in accordance with the low acid canned food. So that covers the microbiological. Then there's also physical and chemical documents that I need. So if I, as the importer, haven't learned what I need to know, and or the supplier hasn't learned, then that communication won't take place, and we're going to assume that everything's good to go. And while we were talking and all that, when we get back into real life trade shows, I saw changes before, and they will have to continue along this lines, because one of the things you do, you go to a trade show, you're there to say, hey, I can supply you product. Well, if I'm buying from you, and Anuga is on for later this year, so Anuga, a huge trade show in Germany, and I'm going to your booth, I need to start asking you right then, and you should be prepared to speak with me about your preventive control plan. That's what they call it, because it's, you identify the hazards, you put preventive controls in place. So you may not want to share with me until you get to know me a little bit more, all of your documents, but in order for me to start doing business with you, I need to review that. And I have to approve each and every foreign supplier that I bring in for each food that I bring in, from each facility that I bring in. So there is this process. So if you know the regulation ahead of time, you're not going to go in with this expectation that I'm going to leave that show with 12 new customers and I'm golden. No, you're starting the process of being approved by each one of those folks. And depending on their sophistication, that'll depend on how quickly you could do it. But if that has changed, and it's just another example of the way communication factors into things.
Right.
I just want to, and then when I was in the export business, sometimes the process takes months. And I just want to know if you have any indications of the time frame that it takes to actually be compliant with the program and have your product approved, because obviously you need the actual product to be approved, whether in taste, in price, and all that. And now you have to go through the process of having the compliance and regulations. Do you have any idea on how long it takes? So Leticia, if you can share with us how long it took you, or if you were importing.
Yes. So during 2020, we really broke a lot of records in terms of adding new suppliers into our supply chain. We did it out of necessity. We did it out of ensuring that we can fulfill the demand that we had at our hands. I would say that before COVID, we could probably onboard a supplier with the sampling process, the documentation process, having our different entities approve the supplier, and then obviously working with the order lead time, we were maybe talking about 4 to 6 weeks. And unfortunately, we have seen that now extend to up to 4 months. And that could be a combination of several things. It could be sometimes the unfortunate timing that some certificates, might be in the cusp of renewing, and in organic, a certifier might want to see renewed documentation before giving the approval for business to move forward. And sometimes it could just be, again, delays in translation of documentation. I think that the more ready a source is to provide documentation, the easier, or at least it can cut some of the corners. A lot of the delays is just miscommunication over misunderstanding of documentation requirements. They might be under the impression they've already fulfilled that requirement, when that not may be the case. In our case specifically, we have very comprehensive checklists so that they know and they can use as a guide. We have examples of documentation so that if perhaps they have something that may contain the information, or a document may look familiar to them, they can go ahead and recognize that document as something that's completed. We also provide, weekly feedback in terms of anything that might be, pending. Of course, you're taking the risk now that instead of you being in the forefront of someone who's a source, now you're depending on somebody's feedback. You might want to be in the forefront of all that. So I think that the more forthcoming, I'll say it from a buyer's perspective, a buyer can be about the requirements that they need in order to onboard. That can help reduce some of the order lead times that we're seeing these days.
Wonderful. Another question about the channels, obviously. So just want to understand that in the US, there's a special value chain and special channels to be able to import products into the US. So if the US has specifically works with importers. Can you elaborate on that, Bob? Because sometimes in different countries, you have an importer who is a distributor, who is also a wholesaler, and it's a little bit different in US, and some distribution channels are well set.
Well, it depends. I'm not sure I fully understand your question. It depends if you're talking regulatory or real life kind of thing. Huh? So if from a regulatory standpoint, there are a couple of shortcut kind of things. There are 3 countries the U.S. has recognized whose food safety systems are equal to ours. They'll never say better, but they're equal to Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. So finished product from those countries, it's much easier to approve and import from them. There's also a program called the Voluntary Qualified Importer Program. So if I want to participate in that, I pay a fee of $17,000, $18,000 a year. It goes up a little bit each year to FDA. And then there are additional costs per product for certification bodies that will approve my products for that. And it involves testing and everything. So you're probably looking at an additional $10,000 to $15,000 per product. And then you are green lighted through the regulatory process, because your entry won't be stopped at import for sampling and testing, because FDA's confidence about you and your safety of the product is way up there. And if you ever are sampled, you go to the top of the list. So you're never going to be waiting long for sample results. So from the regulatory standpoint, those are the 2 options in terms of any shortcut or anything like that.
Right. Yes, the points Bob brought up are very important, and I would like just to add that in many countries, factories are actually, they obtain a number that means they are okay to export. But it is totally different in the United States in the sense that when you have a food facility registration, it does not mean you are approved for export to the US. It only means that administratively your information is in the system and you have a number that identifies you. So companies sometimes get confused in terms of what the European call an agreement in terms of getting a number and what the FDA calls a food registration number. What is also very important to understand is that you might have one factory where you make 3 different products, and the 3 different products are subject to 3 different regulations. So you could be making olives, so you would have black ripe olives that are actually sterilized, and then you fall into the low acid canned food regulation. Then you have olives that are fermented and acidified, then you fall into another regulation. Then you can have black salted olives. Then you fall into, again, another regulation. And so it does not mean, and one might require test submission to FDA, whereas the others will only require submission of a flow chart diagram. So is something very important in terms of how people need to understand on how long it's going to take to actually be able to export their product to the US. I see people who tell me I'm going to export 15 products, and then they get a food facility registration, and yeah, we can export. I say, well, no, you can only export 2 of those. And it is very difficult to say, well, you can export your olive oil, but not your olives. And the person is thinking, but what kind of regulation is that? And that is very important to understand that in the US, not only the product, but the process is part of the regulation. And there is not an approval of the site, it's an approval of process. And, so I find that also very important in the time it takes. Some people actually step back and say, oh no, it's going to cost me too much to prepare to export. I'm not sending, okay, I'll sell this one, but not that one.
Well, thank you, Leila, for all this. It's very important to understand the process as well as the cost of exporting to the US. And I do want to emphasize on how big is the US market and how diverse is the US market. And it's a great opportunity because it is one of the main food importers in the world, and there's a lot of companies that are importing the food. So my next question is to Leticia. And Leticia, a sales standpoint, there's many distribution channels, and it's very regulated. And a lot of people, think they're going to go to, for instance, Costco and deal directly with Costco. It does not work that way in the US as it worked that way in Europe or in different countries. Can you share more about that and what's the channels that they have to go through?
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree. There is, especially when you're looking at a big chain like Costco or a chain that's truly focused on integrity, on visibility, on traceability, there are going to be a number of requirements that say if you were to go to a conventional retail channel, you will not encounter or you will not be requested. And it starts not only from the documentation from a food safety defense perspective, food safety, but even how you transport the product, how, organic certificates, kosher certificates, there might be other aspects of the business that will require compliance adherence. I think the key for any brand looking into expansion into these chains, I think the key to success here is not only obviously surrounding yourself by experts who can help you guide you through this process, but it's also the commitment beyond compliance, commitment to doing the right thing, commitment to, being consistent consistent with your processes. That will make you a dependable source for these chains. The last thing these chains want to do them are volunteer recalls. They happen from time to time. There's no need to feel panic about those items, but obviously this helps reduces those risks and helps mitigates those risks. And obviously, these chains have a reputation to maintain, and you as their source and in their network, you're responsible for adhering to those. I can tell you firsthand that every chain has a different set of requirements. While some might have GFSI requirements, other ones may have, SQF or, other types of compliance that you might want to adhere. So as Leila was mentioning, they can be very costly, especially when you're doing the inception of it, because it's not only the application, but obviously the cost of your business to adapt to these new policies. This might require added people. This might require technology. This is going to require an investment. But from a brand perspective, it opens more doors. The opportunities then are much more vast, especially when you're a premium, type of product where, obviously you're selling at a very specific price range. So the expectation are going to be a lot higher for your brand. I think, excellent points by Leila, by the way. I do agree that, technology can be great, but at the same time, it could be very confusing. It could be, it's a lot to channel. I think the key, again, is having a great communication of the expectations from the start, so that, as a business, how do you want to invest, the capital that is available to you. And it's an ongoing investment. I don't see it as an expense. It's an investment. And it's one that really does pay itself many times over for as long as you're committed to the program.
Thank you so much. We are coming to an end. So other than communication, if I had to ask you, what's your advice for the future importers into the US market? Leila, what's your advice?
Well, I would say step by step, it is very important that companies try to jump to the latest regulation, but they should always remember that before HACCP, before HARPC, there are good manufacturing practices that have been in for a long time. And sometimes people invest so much in the documents and in putting together their plan that they forget the basis of the actual regulation on which the new regulation was built on, which are the good manufacturing practices. So I would say you want to go to classes, but you might want to send people once a year to refreshing classes for good manufacturing practices and sanitary operation procedures. This is where I find usually during audits the most problematic situations.
Thank you, Leila, for sharing. Bob, how about you?
I say pick your partners carefully on both ends. You want to have conversation. Now, I don't know Leticia at all. I'm impressed by what I heard today, and that's the kind of conversation that I want to have with my supplier or vice versa. Don't, if I'm your importer here and I can't speak with you about the regulation and I don't ask you for anything, that's a sign. And I have a feeling if Leticia went to your trade show booth and saw that you had FDA certified up there, she would know you don't understand our regulations that well. Maybe it's a language issue, but perhaps it's more. So you want to say, are you working with someone like Leila who can consult with you, or you're a member of a trade association like AFI or in a producing country? Where are you getting the information that's going to help ensure that you're a good business partner? And both sides should be asking that. And quite frankly, if you're serious about the US market or another market, belonging to a trade association in that country is a good way to understand and get ongoing information about the regulations in that country. So it puts you in a better position to be a good business partner. And always keep that business partner in mind. Real quickly, there's one product in particular as a history of when the price went up, the exporters just didn't ship. Well, those folks aren't in business anymore. Their competitors who work with their supplier, their customers here, are in it for the long term. They're still around. They're still doing well. So you just want to be a good partner, and you want to do as much vetting of that as possible as you create your new relationships and work on your existing ones.
Thank you, Bob. And Leticia?
I totally agree with Leila and Bob. I think from my perspective, always work with an expert in your industry, especially if this is going to be the first time around. Surround yourself with experts, with consultants that can help you guide through the process. Regulations, as much as it's all about adherence, is also about interpretation of the regulations. You know, there are going to be many things that don't apply to your business, or that perhaps need to be customized and catered to your business. With someone that doesn't have the expertise, maybe spending a lot more time than they need to adhere to these regulations. So my biggest advice for anyone who's either a startup or trying to scale up their business, I would definitely recommend working with a consultant that's an expert in the subject. Chances are you might be going down rabbit holes that are unnecessary, and the agencies are there to protect and mitigate risks. But again, a lot comes to the interpretation and what you're doing with your business, and that could make the difference, and it could save you money in the end.
Thank you all so much for being my guests today. I hope you get to network with our audience. Please ask your questions directly to Bob, Leila, and Leticia through the platform. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice seeing you all.